So needless to say, when we talk about currencies, when we talk about programmable money, there's one topic that usually will come up. And here's yet another red slide. So a topic that I spent a good amount of time on examining, and I read a lot of the design papers for these instruments called central bank digital currencies. Oftentimes in the discussions that designers of these ideas put forth, they're comparing it to cryptocurrencies. And that is, in my personal opinion, rather disingenuous. I actually wrote an article for Hacker Noon a couple of weeks ago on that topic, because you have to focus again on what are the use cases, what are the problems that cryptocurrencies are attempting to address. And interesting enough, debasement is the one that comes to mind readily, but the larger problem, and there I'm talking globally, of government-issued fiat currency is really the topic of surveillance and the topic of censorship. So it might not be such a big problem to us if you have to go through a process of KYC here in order to establish a bank account, and then you get to participate in the current financial system. But it's a huge problem for people that don't have government-issued credentials, and because of that fact alone, cannot participate. So globally, more than 1.7 billion people fall in this particular category, so they cannot participate in the current financial system at all. And we don't expect this to be solved by central bank digital currencies, albeit there's some virtual signaling in most of these papers, but it's somewhat difficult to take those serious because they're usually followed up with the statement that we still have to implement anti-money laundering measures and KYC ideas, which are largely misguided. It's a separate talk that I give on that particular topic that will stretch over more than an hour. But the general statement here is that CBDCs at the current stage of discussion don't seem to address the surveillance censorship aspect, and then obviously, what should be rather obvious, don't address the topic of debasement. And actually, when we first did our analysis of what will be the impact of blockchain-based solutions on global financial systems, we built big buckets here on my whiteboard here in the office, which takes up an entire wall. We outlined all these big buckets that I talked about, M1, M2, so demand deposit account and certificate of deposits, money market accounts, and then lending for real estate, FX trading, remittance, and so forth. But the one thing that became rather obvious is that what I mentioned earlier, that the demand deposit account doesn't have to exist from a technical perspective. There's no reason for it to exist. So the debasement as a result of that can entirely go away, because if you don't hold onto an inflationary asset for more than it takes to move bytes, which the technical limitations here are somewhere close to the speed of light, then you don't experience the debasement. And as far as I'm concerned, that should be a feature of any wallet, and I use that term carefully, out there by default to put you in a position where you actually don't have to hold on to anything that's being debased every single second of the day. And obviously, other countries are much more impacted by that. So if you're listening right now and you're in the United States, and you might be okay with the level of inflation. And as a side note, inflation is something that's very personal. So there's absolutely no reason to talk about inflation in general terms. It's very specific to the individual. If you hold a lot of assets in form of, i.e. real estate, then inflation might actually be something that's beneficiary to your personal wealth. On the flip side, though, if all your savings are in government-issued fiat currencies and the government decides to create 20–30% more, that has a huge impact on your financial well-being. And unfortunately, it has the largest impact on the people that can least afford that. And that's what unfortunately happened last year. But then globally, it's actually much, much worse. So there's, in terms of people that are unable to participate in the normal banking system and are purely living in a cash-based society, which in Mexico, for example, half of the population is unbanked. The same is true for countries like Colombia, Argentina, Indonesia, Philippines, and so forth. And on the debasement side, you have countries like Turkey and so forth, where inflation is much higher than even the most charitable versions that are being published in the United States. And now so now we got